Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine for a moment the world of the Matrix.
Right, the movie.
Yeah, this idea that everything we perceive as real could actually be, well, a massively complex computer program.
Mm-hmm.
For many people, that sounds like pure science fiction, right? But the possibility that our entire universe, our very existence, might be a simulation.
It's actually been seriously discussed.
Exactly. By philosophers, even some scientists.
It's fascinating, really. While The Matrix made it globally famous, it taps into much older ideas. You know, the classic brain in a vat thought experiment.
Oh, yeah, where your brain's just floating somewhere, being fed signals.
Precisely. It's this fundamental question across cultures. How do we know what's real? How can we trust our senses?
Right. So if you've never really thought about this before, or maybe just heard the term thrown around, that's what this deep dive is all about.
We want to explore the simulation hypothesis.
Yeah. Unpack the key questions, make it understandable, for everyone listening, wherever you are. Think of us as your guides on this slightly mind-bending journey.
So, first things first. What is the simulation hypothesis, fundamentally?
Good starting point.
In its simplest form, it's the idea, the proposition, that everything we experience, the universe, physics, even our consciousness,
Everything.
could just be part of an incredibly detailed computer simulation running on some kind of, well, advanced tech we can't even imagine.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting because people are approaching this from different angles. There's a scientific perspective.
Mm-hmm. Like Melvin Vopson's work.
Exactly. Vopson at the University of Portsmouth. He's proposed something called the second law of infodynamics. Now, most people know the second law of thermodynamics, right?
The one about entropy, things getting messier over time.
Yeah, like your room or sandcastle getting washed away, disorder increases.
But Vopson noticed something different with information. He suggests information is, like, fundamental, maybe even another state of matter, alongside solid, liquid, gas.
Wow.
And this information doesn't seem to follow that same rule. Its entropy, its disorder, seems to stay constant, or maybe even decrease.
Hold on, let me get this straight. So, physical stuff gets more disordered, but the information underlying it gets more organized or stays the same.
That's the observation he's making, yeah.
How does that link to a simulation then?
Well, Vopson argues this suggests a kind of data optimization or compression happening in the universe.
Okay, like cleaning up files on a hard drive?
Sort of. Imagine you're running this enormous, complex simulation, our universe maybe. To make it even remotely possible, you'd need to be super efficient with data.
You'd have to compress things.
Yeah.
Optimize.
Exactly. So the fact that the universe seems to be doing something like that, Vopson thinks it might be a clue, a hint that it has a digital nature.
That's quite a leap. And didn't he look at viruses too? SARS-CoV-2.
Yes, he did. He analyzed the mutations of the virus and found, or claims to have found, a pattern suggesting the mutations weren't totally random, meaning they seem to evolve in a way that minimized this information entropy. He argues this might be another sign of some underlying structure, maybe a digital one.
It's definitely a fascinating idea, this infodynamics, a self-optimizing simulated universe.
It is. But we absolutely need to stress, as our sources do, this is pretty new territory.
Right, it needs a lot more proof. Rigorous testing.
Absolutely. The scientific community isn't convinced yet. There are definitely other ways to interpret that data. Vopson's connection to the simulation idea is still, interpretive.
Not conclusive evidence.
Not yet.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. From physics to philosophy. Nick Bostrom's paper from 2003.
Ah, yes, the simulation argument. Very influential.
He frames it as a trilemma, right? Meaning one of three things has to be true.
That's it. So option one, humanity probably goes extinct before we reach what he calls a post-human stage.
Meaning like super technologically advanced?
Exactly. Advanced enough to run incredibly powerful simulations. Option two, maybe we do reach that stage, but very few of those post-human civilizations are actually interested in running ancestor simulations.
Simulations of us, of their past.
Precisely. And option three is that we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now.
Okay, wow. Let's break down those terms. Post-human civilizations.
Think about the tech jump from an abacus to a modern supercomputer. Now imagine another leap like that, or even bigger. That's the kind of computing power Bostrom is talking about for post-humans. Staggering capability.
Right. And ancestor simulations.
These would be incredibly high-fidelity simulations of past eras. maybe even simulating individual consciousness, thoughts, feelings, super detailed recreations.
So Bostrom's logic is, if these posthumans can run tons of these simulations, and they want to,
Then statistically, the number of simulated beings, like us perhaps, would vastly outnumber the real beings in the original base reality.
so the odds shift. It becomes more likely we're one of the simulated ones.
That's the core of his statistical argument, yeah. It's about probability.
Okay, so if you're hearing this for the first time, the big question is, what would it feel like? Would we know?
And that's a great question. If the simulation is good enough, probably not. It could feel completely real.
Like in The Matrix before Neo took the red pill.
Exactly. Bostrom talks about substrate independence, the idea that consciousness might not need a biological brain.
It could run on silicon.
Yeah.
Or something else.
Potentially, yes, if the structure and information processing are right, but then you get into really deep water.
Philosophical zombies.
Right, beings that look and act human, perfectly mimic consciousness, but maybe there's nothing going on inside, no subjective experience.
Just an incredibly complex puppet show.
Kind of, and it raises the question, would a simulation need to create real consciousness or just a perfect imitation? Is that even possible?
And could we tell the difference?
Big questions. Our sources definitely touch on the uncertainty there. Simulating genuine consciousness might be computationally impossible or just unnecessary for the simulation's purpose.
It makes you think about dreams, doesn't it? They feel so real when you're in them. Maybe waking life is just a more persistent simulation.
It's a compelling analogy.
And then, what if our simulators are also in a simulation?
The nested realities idea, simulations all the way down.
Like Russian dolls, yeah.
The comparison to virtual machines on a computer is helpful here. One computer simulating another. It's theoretically possible you could have layers upon layers of simulation.
Okay, my brain is officially working overtime now.
Yeah.
So we've talked about what it might be like. But is there any actual evidence, anything beyond Vopson's ideas or Bostrom's logic?
Well, as we said, Vopson's infodynamics is put forward as one potential piece. Then there's the double slit experiment in quantum physics that often gets mentioned.
Right, the quantum weirdness one.
It is weird, but we need to be careful here. This is very much an interpretation, not proof.
Okay, so quick recap for anyone unfamiliar. Tiny particles, shoot them at two slits, they act weirdly, like waves sometimes, particles others.
And crucially, their behavior seems to change depending on whether you're observing them closely at the slits.
Which some people compare to video games. Like, the game only renders what the player's looking at to save processing power.
It's that kind of analogy, yeah. That maybe reality itself only renders or becomes definite when observed. But standard quantum mechanics has explanations for this, well-established ones, that don't require a simulation. So calling it evidence for simulation is a big stretch. It's an analogy, mostly.
Okay, and what about the moon and the sun looking the same size from Earth? That perfect fit during a solar eclipse.
That's another one people bring up. Seems like too much of a coincidence, right? Maybe it was designed, fine-tuned by a simulator.
Seems improbable, statistically.
Perhaps. But there are counter-arguments. The vastness of space, the conditions needed for life to even be here to observe it, that's the anthropic principle.
Meaning, we only exist because the conditions are right, so observing coincidences isn't that surprising.
Something like that. Plus, their apparent sizes aren't always perfectly matched due to orbits. So, again, it's debated, not solid proof.
So it really sounds like the evidence is more philosophical, maybe some intriguing scientific observations, but nothing concrete.
Precisely. More like interesting parallels and thought experiments than hard scientific fact right now.
Okay, so another huge question then. Who? Who would run this thing? And why?
Bostrom's argument points towards those advanced post-human civilizations.
Right.
Their motives could be anything, really. Historical research, maybe entertainment, maybe something we can't even guess.
And what about the ethics? We found that PhilArchive paper, A Theodicy for Artificial Universes, it digs into the morality of it all, right?
It does. It asks, if our world contains suffering, what does that say about the creators? Are they responsible?
Does it mean they're evil? Or
Right.
bad programmers?
Huh. Well, the paper suggests it's not necessarily that simple. Maybe the creators don't have perfect control. Or maybe our existence, even with suffering, serves some greater purpose, like gathering knowledge.
A purpose they deem worth the cost. That's unsettling.
It is. The paper even floats the idea of forgotten simulations, ones that were started and just left running.
Wow. So maybe nobody's even watching anymore.
It's a possibility within these hypotheses. The original creators could be long gone.
And could we ever find out for sure? Is there a glitch in the matrix we could spot? A real red pill?
That's maybe the biggest question. In another paper we looked at, the simulation hypothesis and the crisis of epistemological certainty suggests it might be fundamentally impossible to know.
Why?
Because the hypothesis challenges our very basis for knowing anything, even the laws of physics or scientific predictions. They might just be the rules programmed into the simulation.
So discovering the code wouldn't be breaking out. It would just be reading the user manual for our simulated reality.
That's the worry, yes. Our most certain knowledge might just be knowledge about the simulation, not about any ultimate base reality. It creates this profound uncertainty.
Okay, my head is definitely spinning now. But surely there are strong arguments against this whole idea. Criticisms.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of them. The Literary Hub article points out a big one from physics.
Which is?
Our best theories, relativity, quantum mechanics, they rely on deep, continuous mathematical symmetries. We don't actually know how to replicate those perfectly with a step-by-step computer algorithm.
Like trying to draw a perfect circle using only tiny straight lines. It's always an approximation.
Exactly. Nature doesn't seem to compute things in discrete steps like our current computers do. When we simulate physics, it's always an approximation. So if the universe was a simulation, maybe we'd expect to see signs of that approximation, that discreteness.
And we haven't found any.
People have looked, but no conclusive evidence of space-time being pixelated or anything like that has turned up so far.
Interesting. What else?
That Phil Papers article, Two Near Doubts About Simulation Arguments, raises issues around consciousness itself.
How so?
It brings up ideas like panpsychism, the notion that maybe consciousness isn't just produced by complex brains, but is a fundamental property of matter itself.
Okay.
If that's true, then just simulating information flow in a computer might not be enough to create genuine subjective experience like ours.
So a digital simulation couldn't replicate real feeling.
It might not be able to. In which case, the only way we could be in a simulation is if our actual physical brains were wired in somehow.
The brain in a vat again.
Right. And the authors argue that specific scenario is much less likely, statistically, than Bostrom's idea of fully simulated minds.
So the nature of consciousness itself could be a major roadblock for this simulation argument.
It's definitely a significant challenge. And then there are practical questions, too, raised in discussions online, like, could even a quantum computer really have enough power to simulate our entire universe down to the quantum level?
It just highlights how many assumptions are built into this.
Huge assumptions about technology, about consciousness, about the motivations of future beings. It's built on a lot of ifs.
Right. It's fascinating, definitely thought-provoking, but still very much speculative.
Exactly that. Speculative.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up for everyone who's been following along, especially if this was your first real look at the idea.
Good idea.
The simulation hypothesis. The idea, our reality, is a computer program. We've heard arguments for it, like Vopson's infodynamics suggesting data optimization.
And Bostrom's statistical trilemma about post-human civilizations.
Right. But we've also heard major challenges. Simulating the known laws of physics accurately, the deep mystery of consciousness, the lack of concrete evidence.
It's a captivating concept, but far from proven.
And our goal here wasn't to give you a final yes or no because, frankly, nobody has one.
No, it was really just to introduce the idea, explore some of the thinking around it, answer those first questions you might have, a starting point for your own thoughts.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If somehow you learn definitively tomorrow morning that this is a simulation, would it change anything for you?
How you live, what you value.
Yeah. Or flip it around. If we eventually develop the power to create these kinds of simulations, what responsibilities would we have to the beings inside?
That's a heavy one. Definitely food for thought.
Absolutely. We hope this has sparked your curiosity.
Please do check out the sources if you want to dig deeper. There's a lot more out there.